So right away, let's take a look at what we can do inside this work unit. As you can see, when we select away from it, all of these go away, they get grayed out. But when we select our work unit, these become available. And these are the various types of containers that you can create inside of your work unit for your logic structure. Now in this first module, we're just going to start with the most basic and common, which are the random container and the sequence container. And they're actually cousins, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So we'll start by creating a new random container, and we'll name this footsteps. And right away you see that the property editor populates itself with the tools that are unique to this particular container, and we can control a number of different things here. The one that I want to draw your attention to now is the play type. So you have random and sequence, and you'll notice that when we select sequence, this random container has actually, the icon has become that of a sequence container, and you can do that either way. So in fact, sequence and random containers are very similar, and the primary difference between them is the play type. We'll look at that in a moment, but first let's populate this container with some audio assets. I have my audio assets on the desktop. You'll have these same ones available to you. Now I want you to ignore all of the different things that are going on here. For now, we're just going to start with the gravel walk assets. So let's start by selecting those. There's 10 of them. And then you can just click and drag those into the footsteps random container. You'll see that by default, they're selected as sound effects, and that's exactly what you want. So just hit import. Now, before we move on, I want to show you a couple of things about importing audio. If we were to go ahead and import these again, or attempt to, we click and drag on them, we place them over the footsteps container. Now you'll see that it recognizes that we already have these, use existing object. So you can select sound effects instead of use existing object and hit import, and then what it'll do is it'll ask if you want to replace those assets as opposed to just using the existing ones. So you can select use existing, cancel, or replace. And we're going to cancel out of this for now, but the advantage to doing this later on in the project is if you're updating some sound effect, then you can re-import it and replace the one that's there so that it's already in its exact structure and all of the settings will be remembered. One other thing that I want to talk about is that you can import, I'll just grab the run for now. You can import them in another way as well. You can put all of your audio files into the top level folder, and then by highlighting them and holding down Shift, you can create higher level folders inside which these will then live. So then you could select a random container, call it footsteps run, for example, and that would be identical to the structure that we just created before. By the way, you'll also notice that there's an asterisk up here next to character, and what that means is that we have not saved the project. So just go ahead and Control S, and then you'll see that goes away, and now our project is saved. There is no autosave in Wise, so I recommend that you save often. A note if you're working on Wise in Mac, the Mac version of Wise actually lives within a Windows shell, so even though you're working on a Mac, you'll want to be using Windows keyboard shortcuts such as Control S as opposed to Command S. Now for now, we actually don't need this footsteps run, so I'm just going to delete it. And now we can take a look at how this random container functions. So first of all, we have volume. This is fairly straightforward. If you hit spacebar while this is selected, you'll be able to play it, and it will randomly select any one of these files and play it. So volume, that's a master volume, so we could say -10. That's a little better. But there's also this really interesting little circle here. This is the randomizer. So if you double click on that, you're going to have a little extra control. You can enable the randomizer, and then what this does is you can create a volume offset. So let's say I go -5, that's -5 decibels, and +5 decibels. This means that every time that you trigger this footstep container, your footsteps volume will actually be somewhere between -15 and -5, because that is -10, +5, and -5. So these are always relative to your primary selected volume. Now for footsteps, you want to have a little bit of variation, but 5 is actually quite a lot. So let's bring that down to 2 and try it out. So you have a little bit of variation there. You can also do this with pitch. So a pitch of 0 means that the original pitch of the asset is simply unaltered. This is valued in cents. There's 100 cents in a semitone. So if you go up 100 cents, then the pitch of your asset will go up by 1 semitone. You don't hear it very easily, so let's bring it in 1200. That's 1 octave. So you can hear that. Bring it back to 0. Again, you can randomize pitch. So doing this can add a little more variation to your sounds so that it doesn't sound so repetitive. Taking a look down here, you have a low pass filter. So let's just play with that so you hear what that sounds like. If we bring it up halfway, it sounds like everything's a little bit underwater or behind a wall. And a low pass filter, that's just pulling out all of the high end in the sound. And the higher this number is, the less high frequencies exist. Once again, you can randomize this. You can do the same thing with a high pass filter, which pulls out low frequencies, but we're not going to use that for the footsteps. So now let's take a look over here at the play type. We've already looked at random versus sequence, but now I want to take a look at standard versus shuffle. Now the difference between standard and shuffle, the default is standard, is that when you're selecting standard, it will play any one of these every time it triggers, with the exception of the one that it just triggered because of this, avoid repeating last one played. If we were to uncheck this, then it could select gravel walk L1 again and again and again. Obviously the chances of that are low, but it's possible, and you want to try and avoid repetition. So I would recommend avoid repeating last at least one. If there's a lot of assets like we have right here, I'll even bring it up to 2 or 3. The difference is shuffle. When you select this, it will go through the entire playlist before it plays one again that it's already played. So we'll stick to standard for now. And the last thing that I want to look at is the play mode. So we have step and continuous. Now what continuous means is that we'll continuously trigger this once it's been triggered once. So what I mean by that is the game engine will trigger this footstep container. If it triggers it once in step mode, it will play once, like so. However, if it is in continuous mode, then this event container will just continue to play again and again and again, triggering itself again and again. You can set it in a loop, which will mean that even if all assets have been selected, it will continue to play assets. If you don't check this, then once it has played all of the assets, it will stop. We'll look at transitions later. This has to do with how we're moving between the assets. For now, for footsteps, we really want step mode. So every step a character takes will trigger the footsteps container again.